Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Paul, and in this Gaming.com video, we're going to be discussing and analysing tech news which, as usual, has popped up over the past 24 or so hours. We're going to start things out with the RTX 20 series of GPUs, which, at least of the date of my recording this, would represent the lowest end cards that Nvidia have announced in the 20 series of GeForce graphics cards. So, the website PC Online has managed to grab an interview with MSI, and they have confirmed of why we're seeing a delay in the launch of these GPUs, while there has been issues with the 20 series in general in terms of availability and a few other bits and pieces as well. So first things first, we're going to start things out with the release date for these GPUs. MSI have confirmed that the RTX 2070 cards will appear on store shelves by October the 17th, 2018. So not too long to wait as of the time I'm recording this. But what gives in terms of availability? In fact, availability of these GPUs isn't just something that's been hampering the release of the 2070. Don't forget that the RTX 2080, 2080 Ti and 2070 were all announced at the same time. But the 2080 Ti's were postponed. We actually saw a launch window pushed back a week. And in fact, quite a few people with the 2080 Ti Founders Editions, in other words, the GPUs bought from Nvidia, actually experienced a delay with shipment. I'll get to that in just a moment, I promise. But let's hear what MSI have to say. So, one of the issues is the lower yields of a large GPU die at 12nm. And Nvidia, according to MSI at least, does not supply enough GPUs to reach to each AIC, and increased complexity in card manufacturing is another issue. The 1080 Ti has 1600 parts. Compare that to the 2080 Ti, which is 2600 parts, or to put it in a different way, 1000 parts difference. What about the 2080? Well, that uses 2400 parts. And the 2070 uses 2200 parts. So once again, even if you were to take lowest end SKU, which is the RTX 2070, it uses 2200 parts compared to 1600 parts of the 1080 Ti. And then furthermore, when you combine that with manufacturing issues, because according to MSI once again, the GTX 1080 Ti was previously produced, a production line could produce 3500 sheets a day. And with the 2080 Ti, there is only 1800 sheets a day. So in other words, it's quite simple. Not only do we have lower production numbers, but the cards themselves are more difficult to produce, and the GPUs are more complex. This actually backs up another rumor that we've heard, and I tackled it a while ago. Turing was originally, at least according to this rumor, intended to be produced on a 10nm process. And it also really heavily explains why they did not even contemplate 7nm for consumer level cards. It would have, of course, increased the cost of the GPUs further still. In fact, there's also another really interesting post that's doing the rounds on Reddit and actually prompted Nvidia to formally comment on the availability issues of the Founders Edition's GPUs. This is actually something that I just never got around to covering, but I figured I'm going to throw it in here because it does back up this claim from MSI. A Reddit user by the name of Grimdar actually emailed Jensen Huang directly, and according to the Reddit user, he CC'd in the VP of Worldwide Consumer and Business Development, who then responded back and said that we had a problem with our supply chain visibility due to product build coming along slower than anticipated. We sent out notes to consumers prior to the 9/20 ship date, notifying about shipment delay following our 9/24 with a new shipment date. Unfortunately, our customers with system profiles opting out of marketing communications were overridden by the system, and these notifications were never sent, and this omission likely included yourself. I'm sorry to have wasted your time, and we'll get back to you with a more detailed update. And then Nvidia, of course, started to send out the Founders Edition GPUs to folks who purchased the card, and they upgraded them, to expedited shipping. So the too long didn't read here is now we have the launch date of the 2070 GPUs. We know why there has been a delay, and it would appear at least that NVIDIA have just basically been trying to use any GPUs they could for the 2080 and the 2080 Ti because yields have been at a premium. This is something that's probably going to be getting better over the next several months, and also explains one of the reasons that the GPUs are so expensive. You've also got other factors to consider, of course, like R&D budget and just the general sheer size of these cards, the amount of RAM that's in them, and so on and so on. But anyway, hopefully that answers some questions for a lot of people. Now let's move over to Intel. There has been an awful lot of anticipation of the next generation of Intel processors. In a rather large announcement, Intel have finally confirmed not only the 9th generation of processors for the mainstream along with the specifications and pricing, but we also have it for one of the HEDT platforms as well. So first things first, what about the i5-9600k and other processors? We have the naming convention that has been leaked for some time now. So we have the i9-9900k, the i7-9700k, and you guessed it, the 9600k as well, which, as you would expect, is an i5 part. So the base clock for these is 3.6 gigahertz for the 9900k, but with a single core turbo frequency of 5.5 gigahertz. The threads, as you would expect, 8 cores, 16 threads, TDP of 95 watts, 16 megabytes of level 3 cache. Of course, it is unlocked. There is also additional PCIe lanes. We see 40 of those. Support for DDR4 2600 megahertz. And the crucial factor, the thing that a lot of folks have wondered, what is going to be the pricing of this processor? $488 US. Of course, you can do the regional currency conversions yourself, and no doubt over the next few days we'll see all of the retailers in the universe start to put these available for pre-order. In fact, some retailers already have them for pre-order. What do I think of the pricing? Well, honestly, it's really difficult to know. It doesn't take you more than a second to think, 8 core, 16 threads, what are AMD charging for the Ryzen series of CPUs? And of course, the answer is considerably less. The 1700X is going at an absolute ridiculous steal right now, and the 2700X is also pretty darn cheap. So when you're looking at over $200 difference between 8 cores and 16 threads, it's really easy to say, well, Intel are certainly more expensive. This is even more true when you consider the motherboard. So yes, when you factor in the motherboard, don't forget you can use a basic B350 motherboard or a B450 motherboard, and they're really cheap right now. You can get a reasonable one for like under $100. That's certainly a far cry, and remember you can overclock with those boards. That's certainly a far cry difference for the Z370 and Z390 boards and the premiums that are being asked for those. Speaking of which, I know that people are going to ask, well, what about the fact that I have a Z370 motherboard? What gives? Can I just plonk it in? Well, of course, you're most likely going to have to do a BIOS upgrade, so, you know, that's something to take into consideration. But the answer is yes. Assuming your motherboard manufacturer releases a BIOS which supports that particular processor, you can do it. But there is a slight issue. The issue being the motherboard itself and the build quality, particularly the VRMs. In a nutshell, the power distribution on the board, particularly for the lower end boards, simply may not be up to snuff when it comes to supplying the amount of power required for these processors. Does that mean the board's going to explode? Probably not, but it might mean that you either get poorer overclocking, which is obviously one of the reasons to get a K&N unlocked processor, or the other possibility is you might start seeing the cores, throttle themselves just naturally. The other option is you might just get general system instability. So, for example, if you're really heavily stressing all of the processor cores and perhaps the rest of your system as well, there's a possibility that you might just get a crash or whatever else happens. So my advice to you is, well, if you've got a reasonable motherboard and perhaps you can do some Googling online first, that would always be my suggestion, then by all means go ahead and pick it up. So if you have a decent motherboard from Gigabyte, if you have a higher end MSI board, if you have, well, you get the idea, then you're probably going to be okay. But if you've got a bargain basement motherboard, there's a chance, and I'm not going to say that it will, but there's a chance that your motherboard may not be too happy with these processors. As for the other CPUs, the 9700K, a maximum single core frequency of 4.9 GHz, 3.6 GHz base, 8 threads, 8 cores, exactly how you'd expect. 16 megabytes of level 3 cache has been diminished down to just 12 megabytes, 40 PCIe lanes, and is going to cost $374 US. If you're gaming, I suspect that that's probably going to be enough for you. 8 cores is probably going to be more than sufficient for now. For $374 US though, it's still more expensive than Ryzen. Yes, it's probably going to be better in terms of performance. Yes, it's definitely going to deliver better minimum frame rates in gaming. But if you're running a 4K display and you're running even an RTX 2080 or an RTX 2080 Ti, quite often there might be that issue. But it depends, of course, on your budget. Finally, there is the 9600K, 3.7 GHz, has a slightly higher single core turbo speed at 4.6 GHz, 6 cores, 6 threads, and it's going to cost you just $262 US. To put that into some level of context, that's how much you can pick up a 2700X for, roughly. Oh, and in case you're wondering if the clock speed just drops off a cliff if you are running additional threads, so not just loading one simple processor core, the answer is it's not too shabby actually. 4 cores is rated at 4.8 GHz and 8 cores is rated at 4.7 GHz, which is still pretty damn impressive, at least in my opinion. As for the Z390 motherboards, of course support up to 8 cores. We now have solder thermal interface material, so STIM, integrated USB 3.1 generation 2 along with Intel wireless AC. Support for 16 threads, 5 GHz, 16 megabytes level 3 cache, 40 PCIe lanes at 16 for the CPU and 24 for the PCH, and Intel Optane memory support, along with Optane SSD support, along with Thunderbolt 3 alongside that. So what about the HEDT side of things? The highest end SKU is the i9-9980XE. 18 cores, 36 threads, up to 4.5 GHz on the boost frequency, 24.75 megabytes level 3, memory support of 2666, and 68 PCIe lanes. How much is that going to cost you? $1,979 US. In other words, it's a pretty penny. But what is rather nice about this, at least according to what we have listed here, even if you were to go down the stack to the i9-9820X, which is a 10-core 20-thread processor, same base and turbo frequencies, 3.3 and 4.5 GHz, 16.5 megabytes level 3 cache, but 68 PCIe lanes, and it's going to cost you $898 US. The bottom of the pile is an 8-core 16-thread processor, so the same as the 9900, but the 9800X still has 68 PCIe lanes and 16.5 megabytes level 3 cache. Intel also releasing what they consider to be an ultra premium lineup of processors as well for the ultra enthusiast. So these processors are up to 28 cores, but they are rather different. They are the Xeon W3175X, 28 cores, 56 threads, a base clock of 3.1 GHz, a boost clock of 4.3 GHz, but they will be the only Skylake-x 28-core chip available, and this will be on the LGA 3647 motherboard. Now this, to clarify, is the same chip that we saw demoed, which was running at that mythical 5 GHz and scored 7,300 points in Cinebench. There has been no pricing information released for this processor yet, but 68 PCIe lanes and so on, it's going to be really expensive. We just know that for certain. So what's my opinion? What's my takeaway with these processors? Well, in terms of the market, without question, the 8th generation of processors did definitely make a considerable difference for Intel. It shifted the CPUs on the mainstream from 4 cores, 8 threads to 6 cores, 12 threads, but with AMD then releasing the Ryzen 2 series of CPUs, which definitely increased performance by a noticeable amount, both because of IPC gains along with clock speed, Intel of course wanted to then release another series of processors to battle for the 8-core crown. And for now at least, Intel do seem to have taken that from AMD. So if you were to look at anything from productivity to gaming, I suspect Intel will win here. The difference is, though, it is also a considerably more expensive product. So yes, I suspect that when we review these processors, in a couple of weeks' time, I'm going to be telling you guys, hey look, it's faster than the 2700X. This is not different. This is not difficult to certainly get behind as a notion. We know that these processors are going to have a higher clock speed and so on, but they're also way more expensive, about twice the price if you figure in the motherboard and everything else. Does that mean it's going to be worth it to you? Well, of course, that really depends on what you're doing. I suspect, though, for a reasonable CPU for Photoshop, for a processor for standard productivity, for example, let's say you do some basic 3D modeling work, or perhaps a little bit of video editing, and you just want a simple system for that type of work, along with gaming, the 2700X or a similar CPU from AMD is probably going to be the better option. But if you have the cash and you want to plonk that down on a processor, particularly if gaming is also, and I refer here to high refresh rate monitors, where especially if you're playing competitively, you need that additional clock speed, you need that performance to be at an absolute best, then maybe the 8-core 16-thread 9900K is going to be for you. But once again, Intel are charging that premium. As for the HEDT side of things, I'm still not convinced on that. It's not that I think it's a bad offering necessarily, it's just that 18 cores for Intel's processors compared to, let's say, the Threadripper 2990WX, I feel that AMD still have the value proposition here. And yes, the single thread performance may end up being better on Intel, but I suspect for folks who want to run home servers, or you want to do productivity and creation side of things, I suspect a lot of those people will want to stick with AMD, but we're going to have to test, of course, and see what the I/O's like, how it is when we're dealing with memory intensive applications, and so on and so on. With all of that said, hopefully you have enjoyed the video. Normal stuff, like, share, comment and subscribe. There is an Amazon affiliate link you can find in the description of this video. If you want to purchase anything through Amazon, do know that that is a really great way to help out the channel and doesn't cost you a penny more. But on top of that, thanks very much for watching. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.